Hapaday Zantiro, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we're chatting with a member of the largest male religious order in the Catholic Church. There are 17,000 priests and brothers. They're pastors, teachers, chaplains, they're lawyers, doctors, astronomers, and their goal is to care for the whole person, body, mind, and soul through their ministry. And we're speaking with one of the youngest, in fact, the youngest representative of this order here in the Marianas, Brother Dickson Tiwelfil. Is that correct?
That's correct.
He is a scholastic with the Society of Jesus. Brother Dickson, thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be part of your interview.
I was surprised to learn that although the Jesuits have a long history in the Marianas, there seems to be a little bit of a revival going on with actually 5 of you here now in the Marianas. Start us off with telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be where you're at.
That's right. Thank you. So my name is Dickson Tiwelfil, that you already mentioned. I'm originally from Walea, so we have Walea here in Saipan as well. I am the 3rd oldest in the family, so 7 of us siblings. So most of my studies I've done in Micronesia, especially in the FSM area, and of course at UOG to finish up my BA. So yeah, so that's pretty much where it started. So I've been Catholic my whole life, and I become more, I would say, more faithful throughout my training as a Jesuit, especially when I start joining the Jesuit for my training in New York, and then make my way back here in Micronesia. So I ended up here in the Marianas. I would say it's by God's providence, because my original assignment is to go to the Philippines for my theology studies, which is the last stage before I ordained as a priest. And because of the pandemic, they were my superior, like a local superior who were in charge of the Jesuit here in Micronesia, was trying to figure out where is the good place for me to do my online studies. And so talking with the Bishop Ryan here, and then to the province, our province in New York, and our formator in New York. And they look at all the areas and they think that the best place to be for my studies is Saipan, especially because it's away from where the cases of the pandemic is happening. And so because FSM is closed, the border is closed, so I cannot travel in and out, so they think it's better to come to Saipan and not Guam, because Guam is where that cases was active at that time. And so that's really what brought me here in Saipan in the first place. So it was by God providence I ended up here in Saipan.
So as you mentioned, there are a number of other Jesuit priests here. Could you tell us a little bit about them? And I just want to let our listeners know, this is kind of like, I kind of put Brother Dickson in a bit of a situation where this is kind of a test for him, I think. I'm giving him a little bit of a test, but
that's right.
Because the Jesuits just celebrated their 100th anniversary here in the Marianas. But could you start us off with sharing a little bit about who else is here at this time?
Right. So, like I said earlier, there are 5 Jesuits now here in Saipan for the same reason, because of the pandemic. So our superior is Father Edward Quinan, and he was supposed to be in Pohnpei, and because of the pandemic and because FSM is closed, the border is closed, so he ended up coming here. Likewise with Father Jason Towner. Father Jason Towner is just newly ordained just last summer, so he's newly ordained as a priest, and he's also assigned to Pohnpei for his 1-year pastoral ministry. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, both he and Father Ed ended up coming to Saipan as well. And so the only person or Jesuit that is assigned here is Father Michael Linen, and he was assigned to work with Bishop Ryan. He's assisting Bishop Ryan in running the diocese here in Saipan. And we just had another Jesuit who was actually working in the app with one of the high school, the Catholic high school in the app. He was a teacher there, and at the same time was helping out with the parish. And he was sick at one point, so they referred him to Guam. And because he's also helping out teaching philosophy online to the seminarians from FSM and from the diocese of Carolines and the Fiji, and or in general in the Pacific. So he's teaching the seminarians in Fiji, and because Guam is, like I said, the condition in Guam regarding this pandemic is not good. So the superior, Father Ed, decided to bring him here so he can teach here, teach the online classes while waiting for the border for Fiji to open, and we finally go to Fiji to actually teach in person. So now we're 5 of us because of this situation, the pandemic. So we could say that God wants us to be here back in Saipan. So thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the Jesuits first came to the Marianas and why? Well, obviously they wanted to share the gospel, but right. What were the circumstances?
Right. So the Jesuit started, like they came here in Saipan or in the Marianas in the 1668. So that's when they actually came here in the Marianas. But it was because of the third province in Philippines. This is like during the Spanish era. So they were originally working in Philippines, but this Father Victores, San Victores they stopped in Guam just for a short to get supplies, fresh water and other supplies they needed to continue their trip to Philippines. And he encountered the Chamorro or the Guamanians, and he was moved by what he witnessed there. So he noticed that a lot of the Chamorro, in his standard, they're poor people because they don't have clothing, they don't have all the wealth, all the good things that he considered in his own term as rich in that sense. So when he was working in the Philippines for at least 5 years, and then they were thinking of start missioning people into the Marianas, so they start to spread their mission in the Pacific, in our area. So like Marianas was the first one, since that's the route to Philippines. So that's how it ended up coming to the Marianas, mainly because they want to start evangelizing people. But it was started with that encounter he had when he first arrived in 1662 in Guam. And so that kept in his mind until he returned, when he finally assigned to come over to actually work and start evangelizing people in the Marianas. So from there, he brought in other Spanish Jesuit, like 5 other Jesuits, so they were working together. So he's kind of like the leader for them. How they were actually able to run the mission was because of they're very brilliant enough or smart enough to actually train Filipino when they were in Philippines. So they actually brought in some Philippine catechists to help in evangelizing, and they just try to help use the Philippines because they're Filipinos, because they're actually brown skin, and then people from the Marianas, they can relate to them. So they did that, and of course they also have some Mexican people like coming from Mexico helping out because the same complexity of the skin color, and so they use 2 groups, so the Mexicans and the Chamorro, if my history is correct. So that's how they were able to convert or work with the locals in the Marianas in the first place.
Now, their reception was not always friendly. In fact, I understand a number of them became martyrs. Can you share with us about that?
Yeah, so I think in every history there's always that, this clash between the locals and the foreigners who comes in to settle or to do their own business. And so it makes sense in this case that there will be some clash between the natives or the locals with the European, the Spanish at the time. And this is where the Spanish Chamorro War that happened. So there are two periods at this time. I didn't look further in that, but I do know there's this, what they consider is a war between these two. I do know that one of the reasons is because of baptizing. So when they baptize, and some of the natives, they don't want their kids to baptize because they know that the older people, they don't really want it. And I think it makes sense because they're not, they're already used to their way of life, and they have some people who are trying to, follow their way of life. So that kind of started the thing.
Can you tell us about how the Jesuits spread to other parts of Micronesia?
So that's the very interesting part. That's the part that I find very intriguing and exciting, because it's the same thing they did. Like they brought in the Filipinos and the Mexicans, so they did exactly the same thing with the Chamorro. So they used the Filipino and the Chamorro who were converted, and they're interested in helping. And that was the time when this will be after one of the Chamorro War between the Chamorro and the Spanish, because that was the time when some of the Chamorro were actually spread out in Micronesia, so some were in Yap. And so when the Jesuits were starting their work in Yap, especially in Yap, after the Capuchino left, the Chamorros who were there were actually the ones who are faithful. And so they're helping these Jesuits when they finally come back to work in Yap, and then they're making their way to Palau. So Palau was actually after Yap. And then it was later on that they start going eastward. So the Catholics are actually making their way, doing their mission in the western side of Micronesia, and then the Protestants making their way from the eastern. So that somewhere probably in Chuk or Pohnpei where the clash started. So that the Protestants make their way through marshals, and then they come. So that's why on the east side you see it mostly predominantly Protestants, but it's not true today because now it's a mixed marriage, allow both faith or Christians to be spread out throughout Micronesia. But that's how it started. So they use the catechists from Philippines, and then also some Chamorro, especially in Yap and Palau, and then they make their way to Chuk and outer island of Yap as well.
Would you know if there are still Jesuits in other, well, obviously in Guam there is, mm-hmm. and in Chuk, I believe, but the other island nations of Micronesia?
You're talking about the present day? Or
yeah.
So in the present day, the only places that Jesuits are still take part in helping out in the church, it's Pohnpei, and then make all the way to Palau. So we have two Jesuits in Pohnpei now. So Father Ken Yu, and Ken Yu is also a local, he's from Satawal. And then Father Dave Andrews. So they're taking care of the diocese, that area, Pohnpei, including Kosrae. And then we have, sadly, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, so those who were supposed to be in Chuk to continue the work in Chuk are now here, in Guam. So they were in Guam because they're waiting for the border to open. So Matt Cassidy and Todd Kennedy will be the ones who are going out to Chuk to continue working for our school. So Xavier High School is one of our, in fact, Xavier High School is our only high school that is for the Jesuit. The rest of the schools that in the Diocese of the Carolines, including Guam and Palau, were actually for the diocese, but we were the one running it because the bishop wanted us to do the work, because they know those are our field. We work in the school. So we have Father Rich continue our work in Yap with the diocese priest there, Moses, and the deacon. And we have a new Jesuit from Chinese province, but he's originally from I think it's from France or Italy, if I'm not mistaken. But he is part of the Chinese province. So he's now assigned to Palau. So he's helping out in Palau with our high school there. So the Diocese High School that we were also running. And then those of us who ended up here just because of this situation that we were encountering. So yeah, so that's where we are. And then we extend our mission to Fiji. So we have I think three Jesuit in Fiji. So we have Father Arthur, Father Joe, Father Dan, and then Brother Juan. So 4 Jesuit in Fiji now, and of course Father Tom will end up go there after the pandemic, or after the border is open. So we just extended our border to Fiji because the Bishop of Caroline wanted us to help out with the Caroline, the seminarians who were studying in Fiji. So we have some Jesuits who were working in that seminary teaching philosophy and theology. So.
Well, we're chatting today with Brother Dickson Tiwelfil. He is with a scholastic with the Society of Jesus, and we'll be back with more after this break.